Hi class, so nice to see you again. So welcome to week 10. This week we're going to talk a little bit about our first full-length short story of the semester, Charles Yu's Standard Loneliness Package. And we're also going to think of some terms to help us understand this. So, as is normal practice, please make sure you've read the story before you watch the video lecture, just so you'll have some idea of what I'm about to talk about. So, having read Charles Yu's Standard Loneliness Package, it's not uncommon to have a little bit of a face. There are so many different wild, crazy things that go on in this story, which may seem in some ways unfamiliar to you, and yet when you think about it in a different light, are really familiar. So here's what I would like to do to make us think about this. And this is your first word that I want you to learn this week. The word is genre, G-E-N-R-E. I know you've heard it before. A genre is simply a classification of art grouped together by similarity in theme, function, or trope. So again, genre is a classification of art grouped together by theme, function, or trope. And the next word I want to teach you is the word trope. So trope is T-R-O-P. A trope is a recurring pattern or theme. So in other words, genre is defined by all of the things that it has in common. And when we start thinking about genre and specific genres, it comes easy to see the way that this works. So, like, one of my favorite genres to discuss of all time is horror, right? Horror is a great genre because it has so many functional tropes. The trope of the killer being right behind you, the jump scare trope, right? So many things that we recognize in that function. Well, by considering the genre in question and the way that it uses certain tropes, we can learn a lot about the story in front of us. So one of the potential genres that this week's story can be considered to be part of is romance, surprisingly enough. This is, in fact, on some level, a story of boy meets girl, right? And in fact, it's interesting to see the way that it follows a lot of the romance tropes. If you've ever seen a romantic comedy or read any sort of romance, they often follow a really similar pattern, right? A lot of the same tropes come up again and again, and that would be the couple meets at first, and at first there's sort of some uneasiness, but then they start their relationship in earnest, and usually there's some moment where they're caused to break up to the end, and then at the end they get back together, and it's usually happily ever after, right? We could add in some more specific tropes to romance that when you think about it, well, that always does happen. Like, there's always a friend. There's always a friend who's giving you romance advice, and we see that happen here, right? There's always some outside pressure that pushes them apart. Oh, yeah, we get that here, right? So clearly this is in some ways a romance, and yet in saying that, we can also point out the ways that it sort of isn't a romance, or the ways that it messes with the idea of what romance is, specifically because this relationship between these two people, the Kirthi does not seem particularly into it at any given point in time. Her interest seems to be lukewarm at best. And as we continue to learn more about her, we see that might be because she's emotionally scarred and sort of not as available as even she might want to be. But at the same time, it also sort of just messes up the idea of the perfect little romance here, right? And of course, the end is not the normal happily ever after that you might get to, right? The fact that we see that repeated line, okay so, that comes from earlier in the story indicates that it's quite likely our main character has literally been driven insane by what he's been shown at the end. And yet at the same time, even in that moment, it's also a true and honest meeting of two souls who see each other for what they really are. And if that's not the deepest and truest and happiest kind of love, then I don't know what is, right? So it sort of really, by subverting so many tropes in the romance genre, comes to sort of add something to standard romance, right? Instead of being a sort of, and I'm not trying to be insulting here, but a straightforward, you might even say like vapid romance story, boy meets girl, they fall in love, but then it gets hard, but then they get back together and it's lovely at the end. It follows a lot of that same pattern, but it seems to really point to how difficult true love is, and where really honestly meeting another person and staying with them and understanding everything about them is terrifying. And that to me feels really honest and surprisingly real and worthwhile. So, genre, trope, those are the first two terms I want you to learn and to start thinking about how they fit in the story. The third term I want you to learn this week is speculative fiction. Speculative fiction, S-P-E-C-U-L-A-T-I-V-E, fiction, F-I-C-T-I-O-N. So, speculative fiction is a genre of fiction defined by all of the following. So, it's science fiction set in the very near future that includes futuristic elements that tell us something about our current day and age. So, in other words, all speculative fiction makes a commentary about the world that we are currently living in. And this is an excellent example of speculative fiction. It is clearly set in the near future, right? It's not that different in a lot of ways from the world in which we live in, right? Yet, clearly there's this technological leap that changes a lot of how the world is put together, right? But the way that it's changed and the changes it affects are asking us to look at the way our lives are lived now, right? Yes, it is certainly the case that you can't outsource your suffering to individuals halfway across the world. But think of all the work that we do outsource to individuals halfway across the world in order to keep costs down and to make things convenient for us, right? Think of the factories where your iPhones and tablets and the computers you're using to view this very lecture are built, right? Think of the ways that all of that industrial work is, which, is often backbreaking, not paid well, unfortunately dangerous, right? Is moved overseas, is suffering that we don't ever have to witness, right? That we just get the benefits of. Think of all the ways that certain amounts of suffering are removed from your life in the name of convenience. And maybe this story is asking us to look at that to some degree or another, possibly. So those are the words that I want you to be thinking about this week. Also, during this week, you need to be finalizing your starting ideas for your research essays. Remember to check that assignment sheet and let me know if you have any questions or concerns about that. And thank you so much for your time and attention.